Hi, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
Welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes.
It's December,
Whee.
and it is 9.25 months of the 2-week flatten the curve lockdown. What is on the show today, Phelim?
On the show today, well, first the good news.
Very good news.
500,000 people have now watched the Obamagate movie on YouTube, which is great news. That's the movie we made along with the Judicial Watch and Tom Fitton. We made that, and it stars Dean Keane, Christy Swanson, and it reveals verbatim style the plot to undermine the deep state plot to undermine Trump, candidate Trump, and then President Trump. It's really amazing, based entirely on the Strzok, Page, text, John Brennan, James Comey, all their memos, all their text messages. Truly shocking, entertaining, jaw-dropping, and 500,000 people agree. And I think there's going to be some news about DVDs going out to people.
Okay. But you can watch it, by the way, by going to obamagatemovie.com right now, yes. Obamagatemovie.com, and please leave a comment.
On the YouTube.
On the YouTube. Okay, what else are we doing, Phil?
What else are we doing? Well, we have an interview with Data Nerd
and our friend, Justin Hart.
Yes, about what you should and shouldn't believe in COVID statistics, what you should ask and what you shouldn't ask.
And he's also looking at some of the anomalies that have been thrown up by this election.
And what you should and should not believe in election statistics. And, you know, as he says, there's smoke on both ends. That normally means there's fire in between, but we'll get to that later. So we also discuss the much criticized Hillbilly Elegy, the new Netflix movie about Trump country and supposed Trump voters.
Written by J.D. Vance, right? Isn't that the name of the guy who wrote the book?
He wrote the book.
He wrote the book.
We asked, does it deserve the criticism? And it's been criticized from both sides, but we'll talk about that later. And we also look at Rebecca, the new movie, Rebecca, that's also available on Netflix, I believe. We watched it.
Maybe.
Yes, we'll check that.
Which we really liked, by the way, yeah.
Well, it's the teaser.
Oh, it's a teaser.
This is the teaser section of it.
Alrighty, okay.
Don't give away.
We finished watching season 4 of The Crown,
yes.
And we will tell you what all happened there.
And who lied and why.
And why. But first we're going to go over to the interview we just talked about with our friend Justin Hart, who is data nerd extraordinaire and just all-round great guy and great journalist and amazing contributor to everything that we know about COVID. Yeah. So let's go over to that right now. Now we're joined by Justin Hart, who is a data nerd and during the pandemic has been a leading, sane voice exposing the dodgy statistics and media panic porn that has been driving so much of the reaction and devastating politics of this lockdown and this pandemic. He's also, by the way, which is another reason we have him on today, been analysing the election and pointing out some of the very worrying anomalies that have emerged in this election.
In the count of
this election. He is also the founder of Rational Ground, a group of activists and data analysts who advocate for sane policies based on data and accurate data. And he's really someone we advise people to follow on Twitter. And when we're not even talking to you, Justin, we're always saying that. You can follow Justin at Justin_Hart on Twitter.
H-A-R-T.
H-A-R-T. Welcome again to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Guys, it's so good to be back with you. I love our time together. So thanks for all you're doing out there too. We love your consistent fight here.
Well, thank you so much. So we want to start by talking about COVID. And I think the lockdowns came home very particularly tragically to you when you and your family had a recent loss. You had a miscarriage, I know that, and I feel confident asking you about it because I know you wrote about it on Twitter. And it was a sad and tragic thing, made much worse by lockdown policies. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the tragedy that I think a lot of Americans. This is the untold stories. My wife and I, we have 2 kids together. I have a couple kids from a previous marriage, and so does she. And so we were going on to our second time around. It was so great. And we were hoping for a third here, and she had a miscarriage about 10 weeks. Now, listen, there are much worse tragedies that people have been through with stillborn deaths and everything else there. So we're fortunate in that regard that we were able to catch this so early or find out what was going on. But I'll tell you the devastating part was really when to get the procedures that you usually do after a miscarriage. My wife had to take a COVID test. And so literally for 3 or 4 days, she's, usually that's something you take care of the day after or even the day of that you discover a miscarriage. But now she had to wait 4 or 5 days to get that taken care of. And it's just a psychological damage thing. If you can understand, having the body of your dead child basically in your body for 4 or 5 days and waiting for that to be taken care of. And, you're masked up and you have to go through this drive-through. And it's just, it's really, it's impertinent at best, and at worst, it's extremely tragic. We know this because the stats when it comes to stillborn deaths are on the rise. We also know that there are a lot of issues that children are facing in this in these times. 50% of all child immunizations were missed at the peak of the pandemic. And I can write statistics that will tell you how many people might die from those issues there. So these are really tragic events. I had a text the other day from someone in Orange County, which is between where I am in San Diego, where you are in LA, and said her parents both passed away. Both were elderly, but weren't suffering from anything major, except that one of them had a cancerous diagnosis that was missed, and one of them had a blood clot issue. They died within 4 months of each other. And one of the reasons they died is they were too scared to go out and get treatment because of fear of COVID. That fear will do more to harm the country than anything COVID could ever do to it.
I mean, these are, there's so much data out there now. I mean, and I think we were just saying this yesterday, that in a decade's time, there'll be a lot more. None of it good of what has happened here. We're 9 months in now, by the way. So we're 9 months and a quarter into the, 2-week flatten the curve lockdown. And you have, as we said, done an incredible service, data mining what's been going on. What are your big takeouts at this point?
Yeah, I think in general, it's sort of it's an unstoppable tsunami. Once you start going down the path of trying to stop a virus, there's just an addiction to it apparently, and our public policy leaders just have no end to it. I always describe them as sort of gamblers at 2 a.m. in Reno, and they keep putting the coins into the slot of non-pharmaceutical interventions, as we call them, NPIs, trying to do the lockdowns, do the distancing, force the masks, and in the end, we realize very quickly that this doesn't do what they think it does, but they still think that it's just another pull of the sling of the slot machine that will give them the golden ticket, get us all free and clear here.
Yeah, because I thought about it myself, but I may have said it, that you'd think a lot of the lockdowns, a lot of the keeping the economy tight could have been an electoral ploy by Democrat governors, because it's more in Democrat states and Democrat regions to try and keep the economy not booming as it was before the election. And then after the election, they would relax the restrictions. That hasn't happened. In fact, as you say, they're addicted to lockdowns. And no amount of, just like a gambler in Reno, no amount of saying the odds of you winning on this next pull are not good, are terrible, and you're going to lose everything you have. They don't listen, and they're not listening, and they're impervious to data, it seems.
Well, and they're impervious to the results too, because if the cases go up, this is the magic of masks. More than preventing any sort of disease, which there's very little evidence that they do. They protect the policy class, that is the leaders and the unelected health directors, who can use masks now to their advantage, because if the cases go up, they can tell you, well, it's obvious that you're not wearing the mask, right? And if the cases go down, then they can say, well, you see, it's because of the mask. So it allows them to do that. And of course, you get it out too, because you could say, well, I was wearing my mask. It was my neighbor who wasn't wearing the mask, right? And so that becomes a really divisive issue, and it clouds the actual data around things and how they work there. I think there's just once they sort of set down this path, I think that's the key learning, is that, and that's really the main goal that we have at Rational Ground, which is in the medium and long term, is to create policies and stops and factors that we can look at and say, let's make sure this never happens again.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about masks then? Have you got some clear data on how effective they are?
Yeah, well, in a hospital setting, there are some data that show that doctors swapping out masks every 5 minutes to see a patient and everything else there, and having the proper PPE is probably good practice in general, and probably does prevent a transfer of some disease. But that's in a very hospital setting with clean masks that aren't cloth, that are approved, and you can ample supply those back and forth. The data that we have outside of that is null and void. The closest thing we have to a trial study is the one that came out of Denmark just a few days ago, I think a week or so ago. And it showed that there was no difference between the study. They studied 6,000 people. 3,000 of them had a mask. Another 3,000 of them went around without a mask. And in the end, they had just about the same infection rate there. And I think it's generally there. You think about your own self there. It's like these masks really are more for virtue signaling and for show. But yeah. I wear them. I wear them outside, and I wear them to the store. I don't make a public nuisance of myself for that reason. But I do so because people have PTSD. That's my second big takeaway here, is that people have a very distinct fear of COVID that has been unfortunately propagated and promulgated by our local officials, and not just elected officials, but hospital CEOs down here in San Diego. One of the biggest conglomerates, Scripps Hospital, the CEO has been bantering around several times over that they're going to overflow. But I know the nurses there, and I know the doctors there, and they tell me this is a lie. I have the data to prove that it's a lie. And they could shout precaution to the wind, but when it costs someone their job, when all of a sudden some acute surgery that you have is seen as non-essential, and that person dies of cancer, we have some discussion to make. There's going to be some repercussions for the elected officials and the hospital executives who stirred up this fear-mongering.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. People do have PTSD. I mean, I was walking yesterday on the canals. It was a group of 4, and it was 2 in front, and then 20 yards behind another group of 2, and none of us were wearing masks. And this lady walked past with wearing a mask. And as she was walking past, she turned to me. I turned to us and went and coughed in my face.
Intentionally, yeah.
Well, I thought maybe she had to cough. And I was like, okay, that's a bit strange. Maybe she just had a cough. And then she walked to the next group of people, and as she was walking past them, coughed in their face as well. Now,
we're in Venice, by the way.
No, but this is crazy behavior, because if she really believed masks were effective, if she believes it's that dangerous, coughing is she's trying to kill us, right? By coughing at us. If she believes masks are effective, she's not trying to kill us, because, it's madness. It's PTSD. There is no logic to it. I did, because she coughed at the second people after me, I wasn't close to her, but I would have a solution for her madness by throwing her in the canal next time she does that.
No. But by the way, another point about this, and actually one of our listeners, very kind, a nurse up in South Dakota, made a really great point. Just a logical, you'll like this one. She said, if it was true that masks were effective, then an enormous amount of time and money and energy would be spent by the authorities, by the experts, by our betters, explaining to us how you're meant to use them. But I've never, and we're watching the media all the time, I haven't seen one piece of infomercial about how to use a mask. So you watch people doing this really funny thing they do here in Venice, where as I approach not wearing a mask, they do this, and they're all on their hand, and I'm thinking, okay, you've just introduced all the bad stuff right up to the mask. And then this fabulous lady in South Dakota, again, she made the point that she had people coming into her clinic, and a man would be there he'd gotten the wife's mask and the bit of lipstick on it. And then another guy was in her waiting room, and she said, and he was wearing the mask, and then he pulled it down and went, phew, and just because no one knows. And I mean, we're the best examples of this. We're in the car, and we'll go over to the supermarket, and then we'll rummage around in the bottom of the handbag. Where's the mask? As you. And
my handbag is a mess.
On Phil's handbag.
It's a losing cause. But this is nothing. It's a losing cause in many ways. It's really tough because when you fight people against it, they have a visceral reaction to it, and I think it's been a very, very unfortunate thing to inject into the public dialogue altogether. And I wish we hadn't done the mandates. I'll tell you, but this is nothing new. This sort of thing, 400 years ago, there was noted from the journals of the people of Europe who went through the plague, the real plague, the one that took one out of every other life that got it. And in this book called The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni, he talks about, he went and studied the journals of people from back in that time. He talked about this one incident where it was perceived that there were foreign elements that were coming into town to whitewash the walls with the plague so that the pandemic would increase even more. And people became so suspicious of this. Rumors flew far and wide. An old man is sitting in church. He goes to dust off his pew. And from a distance, someone sees him and says, he's washing the bench. He's anointing the bench. They took him outside. They beat him to death, right? And that's the problem that we're going to get into. We've seen incidents of this already, where you inject something that is totally foreign to both human nature of interaction with one, and also just to the element of interacting with people on a regular basis, like masks. And when you treat everyone like they're an infection, then all of a sudden, all society starts to break down. Yeah. And I think no one thought about those repercussions. And I think that's another big takeaway I would say is that no one has thought about the repercussions that when you shut down hospitals, all of a sudden 50% of chemo treatments are missed, right? And then you think about, for example, you're shutting down the schools. Well, one study out of Michigan noted that an estimated 250,000 cases of child abuse were likely missed in the spring, because most of those cases are found by teachers.
How many?
250,000 cases of domestic child abuse were likely missed. And that was just in the first months of the pandemic. And that because most of those cases are discovered by people outside of the family, like teachers, like friends' parents, right? And those were completely missed. So those are stats that, as I described it the other day, it's butterflies and hurricanes. And a lot of people thought that this would be just pretty butterflies all around, and they never stop to think about the hurricanes they're causing on the other side of the equation.
I want to dig into a few things that I really think we could benefit from.
I want to talk about the madness, and you talk about the plague and that person being beaten to death. I mean, that woman, I think, in her normal life, would never dream of assaulting someone or coughing at someone or,
But actually, that lends it where I'm going, because I think an awful lot of, you've talked about, for example, hospital administrators and people in the public health area, but I think the media are incredibly complicit in that madness, in generating madness. And what they've done, we've really done a lot of this on the podcast, where they've changed, it was deaths, then it's cases. It was actually, first of all, it was ventilators.
And tests.
And tests. Then it was deaths. Then it was cases. They cherry pick the number for the number to sound terrible. I want to just ask you specifically about cases. What is a case?
Well, this is a great question, right? According to the COVID tracking project, there have been over, I think, 115 million tests that have been performed. And by that, you might think, well, wow, so a third of Americans have all been tested? No, that's not the case. If you go to a hospital, they test every patient every single day. I've talked to hospital administrators. There is no system in place to, as we call it in the data world, dedupe that data, deduplicate the data. That is, you have duplicates of, well, Mr. Smith tested positive today and he tested positive 2 days from now. They don't, when they share those, well, here are the number of tests we perform, and here are the number of positive cases, and then that gets sent to the county, and then that gets rolled up to the state, and then that makes it to your dashboard. Mr. Smith is counted in there 2 or 3 times. Yeah. And so that's a very difficult prospect. There's a lot of retests, as we say. There are a lot of tests that are being done for purposes of someone getting back to work. And we know also that a case is someone who is a confirmed positive test on COVID. There are a lot of duplicates in there. We also know that the test is so sensitive, it can pick up a virus that you've had in the last 5 days or even the last 75 days. So if you've had it 75 days ago, you are well past the point of having any live virus that could be of harm to anyone on the face of the earth. And yet you're required to quarantine along with everybody else. It's a disaster, and we know exactly how to measure this, right? We know exactly when a live virus is live and when it's dead, and yet we refuse to do so for reasons, right?
Yeah. And I mean, on this case thing, I mean, have they been confronted with this fact that number doesn't represent individual people? It represents positive results of a test, which may, in fact, if you really analyze that data, could be a fraction of the number because some of it's been duplicated.
That's accurate. And a lot of people have been confronted with that, but there's no mechanism in place to sort of dedupe these things. We see at the CDC level that they have their case surveillance file, which has about 5.1 million confirmed people in it. But beyond that, it's just unclear exactly how they're going to do this. I think it's been a really unfortunate guise. And we know that, you know, a lot of the times if these tests, the way they work is very much like, similar to a pregnancy test, in that a line will show up if certain elements of the RNA that they take from your nose is swapped in there. But they have to do it in the lab. What they do in the lab is that it like has the analogy is kind of like a magnifying glass, okay? They have to duplicate that RNA until it starts showing up on the line. Now, every time they do that, it's a cycle. Okay, we call it a cycle threshold. Where they go, bup, 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 and it starts enlarging the RNA. And finally, it gets large enough where they can see, oh, this person does have COVID. Now, they can go as far as 35 to 40 enlargements at a certain time until they see it. But what we've shown, what they do is they take tests and they go, well, let's see if this person actually has the virus. They do it the old-fashioned way. They get a little petri dish and they start examining to see if it grows right. Mm-hmm. And then, oh, sure enough, that person has COVID. Well, they found that anything over 30, basically, 30 cycles, is non-viral. And sure enough, we've gotten the data from certain of these areas. Ventura County, 33% or more of all of the tests were over 30. And therefore, you know, you have massive amounts. We know the New York Times itself reported 2 months, 3 months ago, and it just went away into the ether, that 60, I think it was 40 to 90%, depending on where you were, of the tests that came back probably had no live virus. So we have all these people being quarantined. They're of no risk to anyone else. It decimates the country. It decimates the morale because you see these cases going through the roof. And frankly, when you look at the ages that are getting it, the vast majority of them are younger cohorts who are not going to have an issue. And in fact, it's a very, very positive thing that they're getting it because it'll start building towards that herd immunity, which you need on a natural basis.
Yeah, you point to the young people. Actually, we want to play a little bit of tape here, of Dr. Fauci, who spoke over the weekend about. And Dr. Fauci is extraordinary. I mean, he really is. But over the weekend, we're just going to play this first.
If you look at the data, the spread among children and from children is not really very big at all, not like one would have suspected.
Like, what do you think of Dr. Fauci coming so late? I mean, we've been talking about the fact that children are safe for months, by the way. This seems kind of late for Dr. Fauci to have discovered that children could go back to school.
Very late and decimating. You know, they say it takes about 10,000 hours to become proficient in a specific practice, a talent, ballet, you're a violist, you're an academic, you're a computer analyst, before you become an expert in a certain technique or apprentice there. And we have now cut 1,000 hours, at least, of in-classroom learning from our kids, and they can't get that back. And it's a shame because Dr. Fauci, as you recall when he was talking to Senator Rand, and he made the point of saying, well, I don't think it's quite safe there. And then he brought up the notion of Kawasaki's disease. He's an embarrassment. He's an embarrassment because he doesn't follow the data. You'll notice he never really cites any data. He just talks about things, right? Whereas his counterpart, Dr. Scout Atlas, whenever he dives into things, he will cite you specific statistics as to why he's reasoned the way he does. None of these other folks really do. They'll put up a map occasionally, but they don't base it on anything.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously the children are suffering. There are so many children who continue to be distance learning despite this massive amount of. And by the way, even at this very late date for Dr. Fauci to be saying this, one would like to expect to have heard from California the next day and said, okay, we're opening everything because Dr. Fauci said it's okay, and they're not. Can we just quickly, because there's so much to do here, but we haven't even got to the election yet. Yeah. What's happening with Sweden? So Sweden were bad, then they were good, now they're bad again, right? Are they good or bad?
Like all of Europe, they are seeing a distinct rise in cases there. And what we find is that this is a distinct wave that Europe is experiencing in general. And what we believe is happening is that the flu, the influenza, has been crushed or sort of edged out by COVID. No one's quite sure exactly why. The WHO, the CDC, all of their numbers, they're still testing for tons of flu, and they don't find it. So we think that's part of the thing there. But the other thing to note is that while the cases go up, the other stats are not following in suit. What you see in the spring, what we saw in the Sun Belt during the summer, was that you'd have cases go up and hospitalizations would follow and deaths would follow after that. Well, now we're finding that while cases are going up, hospitalizations are going up, but definitely not on that same trajectory. And deaths are evening out, in fact, lower in many cases. At least that's what they're experiencing over in Sweden.
With your group, I'm wondering, I mean, you know, one of the big takeouts from this, one of the things that I wish I'm shocked at is how deaths are recorded in the United States. I mean, if anything, you know, a lot of things are going to change, I hope, after this pandemic ends. Namely, we're not going to be buying so much stuff or being so dependent on China. But equally, this has shown up massive weaknesses in the ways that deaths are recorded. Can you talk to that?
Sure. Our group actually had the privilege with Governor DeSantis in Florida to gain access to several hundred death certificates, which we were able to examine and try to understand what was the cause of death. And what we found is that 40% of those really should not have ever been coded as COVID deaths. And in some instances, we've seen other reports where 60% of deaths should not be recorded that way. Now, the CDC has given clear instructions that anyone with a positive test should be included in that. But there's another caveat where they allow for probable cases if it was after a certain time or before a certain time. It's what we call death certificate harvesting. Now, if you put yourself in the place of, let's say, a hospital or a hospital administrator, right? And they've just shut down all the profitable parts of your business. This is the kindest thing I could say, or the kindest interpretation, that they're trying to basically keep their hospital afloat, because they will get $16,000 for every hospitalization that they get for COVID and $39,000 for every ICU that they can identify as a COVID patient. Now, I'm not saying they would purposely put people in there, not at all.
What could possibly go wrong?
No, but what they're doing is they're going back. In fact, when a lot of people say there have been 1,000 deaths a day, that is not accurate. We've only just now reached back to those levels. I think maybe this week we'll see how things go. But the last wave we had was August 15th, when we had averaged 1,000 deaths a day. That's because you see the deaths come in and they layer like a blanket over the timeline in the past, right? Mm-hmm. And so in the last round, they found 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 deaths that were put into March, right? And so how did we not know about these deaths back then? Well, they looked back at their cases. They said, you know what? We didn't have the testing regime going then. We're going to put them down as a probable death. Yeah. The hospital gets the money. The state gets the notice. The state might get money instead. It's definitely a very dark situation where people are incentivized in very wrong ways. And then it stirs and it extols the panic. Yeah. And so it's really unfortunate to see that.
So time is moving on.
I want to talk about the election.
Yes,
I definitely want to talk about the election.
Sure.
And you've had plenty to say about the election. What people talk about anomalies. I think that's a nice way.
And you're a data.
This is yours. This is your.
So
space.
tell us what data has caught your eye in the election.
Well, good. Yeah. And actually, just so you know, my background, I was one of the data guys, digital guys on the Mitt Romney campaign. I've spent a good portion of my career in politics. So I know this space very well. And I know a lot of the areas they're talking about. And so when I first saw the numbers coming in, there was just something scawampus about it, right? And I think the issues that they're finding, if you think about the election as kind of like a pipeline, right? And on one end, you got people voting at the machines. And on the other end, we have what we see on the dashboards on the New York Times and Fox News and everything else there. And we have smoke coming out of both of those ends, right? Well, on the front end, we've got these machines which have some real disparities and issues with it. Even the layperson can understand this. If you go watch and Google one of their Dominion software training videos, you'll realize how prone to error it is at the very least, and how potentially prone it is to fraud if someone really got clever. And then on the other end of the piece, we have a listening ear. This is where I've done a lot of my work, which is the New York Times would publish in real time what they were getting from systems in between, right? So you got the voting system, and then Dominion and Edison, and a whole bunch of entities that are sending the information, say, here's where the votes are, and they push them up here, okay? And so what we see is we're able to get the real time, and there would be times when all of a sudden a huge batch would come in for Vice President Biden, and there would be a very, very tiny segment that would be with that. So at one point, a batch of 134,000 went 96% to Vice President Biden, which is just a statistical anomaly. Now, someone might say, well, those were votes from Wisconsin mail-ins, right? And that are Milwaukee mail-ins. Now, that may be the case, but I have no visibility into any of that. Like I said, smoke on one end, smoke on the other end, and in between, we pretty much think there's fire. And this is the challenge that the Trump campaign has, is they need to prove that fire, because it's hard for a judge to overturn millions of votes based on algorithms that I might produce and voting machines that are flawed, but we don't have, we need demonstrable proof that something was amiss there.
It's very good. I recommend to our listeners and viewers actually as well to look at a really good piece from the American Thinker, where they
by Andrea Weidberg.
But what she actually does is she steals from everywhere and brings together 20 main points that she points to as anomalies. I've picked out a few of them that I think you know, obviously, but I think just for everyone to be aware of. And that as you say, it's really going to be challenging in the court.
But there's a lot of smoke.
But there's a lot of smoke. So one of them is obviously that Biden allegedly got 80 million votes, which is more than Obama received at his peak in 2008. And Biden did this despite losing minority voters to Donald Trump and trailing Trump in voter enthusiasm. Biden broke a 60-year precedent, and this is another point, by winning nationally despite losing prodigiously in bellwether states and counties. The last time that happened was JFK, where there was obviously some issues in Chicago that we remember. And the other one, there's 20 points here. I'm only going to mention one more, which I think is amazing. This is an amazing one to me, that Trump exceeded his original vote count by the largest margin for an incumbent in American history. He got 10 million more votes than before. And by contrast, Obama in 2012 got 3.5 million fewer than he did in 2008. That's tough to figure, right?
It is, and that's part of the equation too, which is elections don't happen in a vacuum. They happen tethered to the previous election. So you may have heard, it's often said that Trump beat Hillary Clinton, but if 80,000 votes has switched one way or another, it would have made a difference. But no one mentions that Trump got 2 million more votes than Romney did the previous election. So that was a feat, right? And that's where we're scratching our heads on the mathematical side, because when we look at the trajectory of a county that then burst on the scene in 2016, and we expect it to go here for Trump, and then it's way down this way, you just have to scratch your head and say something is just amiss there. We're not quite sure, especially when other counties in similar veins went for him more strongly this time.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of smoke.
He seems to have done really, really, really well in everywhere except places where he needed to do really well, right? So it's this wave, it's this red wave, but then in places where he needs to be, there was a slump and then a red wave, slump, and it's 4 or 5 places that are the anomaly. And why are they an anomaly? Why wouldn't they go with the rest of the wave?
Yeah, it's difficult to understand exactly what's happening. And again, because so much of it is opaque to us, there's going to be some real repercussions. And that's part of the goal that I have in the next few years, is to see that sort of thing happen, where we can develop policies that will have some bearing. You look at Florida, for example, and the gauntlet that they went through in the year 2000, right? What an embarrassment. These hanging chads, and then a big basket of votes show up in a bag somewhere in Broward County, right? It was a crazy thing to live through. But then you quickly realize when it came to the election a few weeks back, that they were the first ones done because they had gotten their stuff fixed, right? So I think there's a lot of embarrassment, and hopefully people can get their stuff fixed and have at least some transparency so we can see what's happening there, because so much of it is opaque to us.
Well, transparency helps cheaters, or lack of transparency helps cheaters. You know.
Well, hopefully, I mean, I'd like to see, I think we'd all like to see some action in the courts, but let's see. I think, as you said, there's so much that's opaque. It's going to be very hard for them. So we have 2 questions we ask all our special guests when we have them on the scoop. And these are the 2 final questions. And I think I sent them to you earlier. And they are, we ask people, and particularly during the pandemic, have you been cooking up a storm for your very nice large family? And what are you famous for cooking?
What's your go-to?
What am I famous for cooking? I do a mean Kobe fillet of beef on the grill. And this is to take point too. I was on, this is a podcast I went on, and he loved my segment so much he sent me 4 things of Kobe beefsteaks.
Oh,
expectations, guys. No, I'm kidding. But I cooked those up. Just really, you got to grill that just perfectly. And actually, I've been relying. My wife is an incredible cook, and she's put together just amazing meals during this whole thing. But definitely, I have put on my COVID-19, hoping to figure out a way to take that off at some point.
Okay, and in the last 2 minutes, we asked you a piece of art, a poem, a movie, anything that moves you that you'd like to share with our viewers.
I had thought about that. I didn't come to a conclusion, so I'll just kind of pick one now. I'm a big musical theater buff guy, and I love musical theater. I love passioned pieces of incredible art. Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, is one of my favorite musicals of all time. And that's kind of on the darker spectrum. But it goes towards just revealing some of the seedier parts of human humanity, just the nature of man, and how he can devolve if you let him, right? And that's why I always encourage people to read things that are a little darker, because as you go into the dark, the light that you came from becomes that much more prominent, and you realize very quickly where you want to make your bed. And I hope it's on the light side. I think this whole episode of the pandemic has brought out some really dark sides in people. And I've tried to, I was trying to stay positive, but just keep looking to the light.
And something, that's a perfect way to end, and to say that you're very much part of that light. And I really urge people to look at Justin_Hart, H-A-R-T, on Twitter, because what you've done, it's an amazing service to the country. And I love reading your pieces, and you're very positive, despite what's happened in your own family. And as you say, there's so much awful stories out there. Thank you for bringing so much light to this very dark time.
For all you do, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin.
We'll come down there and visit you for the Kobe.
Please do.
For the Kobe one of these days.
Yes.
Okay, that's right. I'll make some steaks up.
Okay, bye.
Take care.
That was really great. I mean, we're very lucky to know Justin. As I said, he's done an incredible service to people here. A couple of things we should have, that I'd like to mention now, actually. Some, with all of this information, the kind of stuff that Justin's talking about, there is a bit of pushback. Even here in LA County, there's pushback. So there's 2 examples that we really appreciate, and we want to just bring to a kind of a conscious level.
We should tell people about LA.
Tell them.
People, there's a curfew in LA.
We have a curfew.
You can't go out between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And I would imagine it's a real curfew, unlike the last curfew where they were burning the city down. They arrested a load of people who broke the curfew and then didn't charge them because they were so emotional about it. So we also, what else is?
So we also have all restaurants are closed, even the ones.
And
so even the people who had created these great outdoor spaces. We'll show a few of those now. Actually, the kind of money that's been spent on outdoor terraces by these wonderful business people. If ever you had, and all these anti-capitalist types who are so anti-business, small business people, and we know lots of them, and we have our friend who has a restaurant on Main Street. It's a heartbreak. These people have gone to huge expense and trouble and creativity to create wonderful outdoor spaces where people can eat very safely at a distance from each other. And guess what? LA County said, yeah, whatever. You know what? We're going to close everything. So they've closed those. We've got a curfew, and we've got a third thing. Yes. We then got slapped with a stay-at-home order, which means, apparently, you're not allowed from this week, you are not allowed to have anyone into your house, and you're not allowed to go to anyone else's house, right, Philip?
That's not part of your immediate family.
But what's really nice is there's been a pushback, and a lovely man called Alex Jordan, who owns a place called Eat at Joe's. It's a Beach Bay diner, and it's called Eat at Joe's at Redondo Beach. He's basically said, you know, feck. And he's basically said, and here's what he said to the...
He says if Gavin Newsom can do it, he can do it, I suppose.
You know, he said, we're still open because I have very loyal employees who have been with me for many, many years, and putting them out of work without any government aid or stimulus or help for 4 weeks before Christmas time is just not okay in any shape or form with me, he said. The fact is they're letting other businesses be open 20 whatever and penalising us. It's not fair. COVID is a terrible thing, but there's no argument there, he said. But I am not sure that picking on restaurants to such a degree is the answer. Anyway, he's a wonderful...
He says, no, actually, he makes a good point there. It hasn't been proven through any medical numbers that eating outside is causing this. And that was asked by this Board of Supervisors.
The Board of Supervisors, by the way.
At the Department of Health. What's the evidence for this? And they don't have any.
Yeah.
They don't have any. They're just flying. They're just taking the most visible example of people enjoying themselves and having a normal life. And
the next time you see us, by the way, I'm going to put up on Facebook or whatever, and I'll probably have video the next day. We're going to certainly go to, what's it called, Phil? Eat at Joe's. We're going to eat at Joe's and tell him he was great. And it's not the only business here that pushed back, which we're really happy about. The other business is Kitson in Los Angeles.
You see what,
oh no, by the way, this is great.
Yeah, Eat at Joe's, which is what we did. We had a birthday party for a certain
young person.
And we put up on our front door the French Laundry Venice branch.
And we think that Eat at Joe's got an idea from us.
Yes, so now
here's their sign.
They put up a sign, yeah, as you can see, the French Laundry patio dining. That's a reference, obviously, to Governor Gavin Newsom, who told people not to eat in large gatherings, more than 6. In fact, very strict, shouldn't be going out. And he was caught having a meal in the most expensive restaurant in California, which probably means in America. And where meals are sometimes $800 a plate
for a tasting menu,
and was basically indoors.
Oh yeah, totally. And the photographs came out, and they were all sitting close together, and no one was wearing a mask and all of that.
Yeah.
The other business, by the way, here in Los Angeles that we're really impressed with, and that we were also going to go and give some patronage to, is a place called, which we don't even know what they sell, but whatever they're selling, we're buying. It's called Kitson Los Angeles, and these are just great people, and what they've decided to do, and you're going to start seeing the pictures here, this is their Christmas display.
Yes.
So here's what they wrote about this on Instagram. While LA was being looted on Saturday, May the 30th, by alleged peaceful protesters, Chrissy Teigen was bailing out the rioters and criminals.
She's the wife.
Married to John Legend.
Yeah.
One of our stores was looted, and we posted a picture of the looting and tagged Chrissy Teigen and her BFF Jen Atkin. They took light to the situation. They made a joke of it, by the way, that these people's businesses have been destroyed. A blogger, which was then, what have I just said there, Philip?
Yeah. So then what happened was a blogger then said to them, "We're going to say that you're racists if you don't donate to BLM," and would post inaccurate facts and threaten us. They let Chrissy Teigen know about this, and Chrissy joked about it and said they would support the blogger misrepresenting them and basically putting a target on their back. So this is a shop.
These are great
that people, are standing up for the truth and calling out Chrissy Teigen, who gave $100,000 to let looters and rioters and burners and arsonists out of jail on bail.
Terrorists. Actually, terrorists. And look at the lovely display they have. So they have what's her face there, Phil? Alicia Milano is there. They have Nancy Pelosi, of course, getting her hair done when you weren't meant to.
Yeah, Alicia Milano. She called for defund the police, and then she saw someone she thought was suspicious. I think it was a gardener in her backyard, and then called the police just as she was also calling for the defunding of the police. So the police are pretty handy, aren't they, Elisa? When it's your property, when it's your family that's being protected.
So they have, and they also have, of course, our favourite Gavin Newsom, and they have Chrissy Teigen and Nancy Pelosi. So that's a great display, and we love them, and we're putting up the pictures there.
By the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast app, you can see these pictures on the YouTube channel. If you go there, leave a comment. If you're on the podcast app, leave a comment as well.
Love that.
We really need the star ratings in the comments.
We
please.
do need that. But I would also ask you to, if you're on the Twitters and all of that, and if you're on Instagram, to go to @Kitson Los Angeles and show them some love. And by the way, I have checked it out. They do have an online store, and just buy a mug or buy a scarf and tell them why you're doing it, because they need lots of love, because God help them. They were blackmailed, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, tell us. We've been watching, we had the lovely Thanksgiving, by the way, and then we watched quite a bit of things, and we decided, you know what, we'll watch Hillbilly Elegy, because obviously there's a huge amount of advertising about it.
No, I thought your mama was going to be all right. Be happy. I know I could have done better. But you got to decide. You want to be somebody or not? You got to write your own life.
Don't make us your excuse, JD.
Family's the only thing that means a goddamn. You'll learn that.
Well, I actually think I saw the John Nolte. John Nolte is one of the greatest writers in America today, maybe the world. You know,
can find him at Breitbart.com.
He's just got a really fresh,
we love John,
aggressive, wonderful voice.
He used to live here.
And I read in California. Yeah,
in California.
And
but he moved.
He moved. He lived in Los Angeles, in fact.
He got away, actually, before the crowd started leaving.
That's right.
Everyone's leaving now.
He is so happy now.
He is happy. And he's so happy. He's in North Carolina, and he says it all the time.
Yes.
I'm so happy, I'm so happy. And he shows pictures of his deck.
So,
all right, Phil.
John, the deck that he built.
The deck that he built? He did?
Yeah.
Okay, Hillbilly Elegy film.
John was reasonably negative about it, but actually the thing you got to know is, well, he's positive about it. The thing you got to know, the elites hate this movie. They hate this movie. Look, there's the Atlantic magazine. Hillbilly Elegy is one of the worst movies of the year. CNN, Hillbilly Elegy turns J.D. Vance's memoir into a dreary movie.
I don't agree.
Well, I mean, so why would the elites think like that? So the movie was originally J.D. Vance's memoir about coming out of, you know, what they're sort of calling is Trump country, and how he got out and what he
ended up in Yale.
Yeah, and so John Nolte explains why the elites hate it. I mean, and the story is basically, you know, and John's problem is that the mother's descent into drug addiction, or very rapid descent, and then screw up after screw up after screw up, it goes on for too long, and it's an hour when 15 minutes would have done. And there's an inciting incident, and the grandmother takes him into her house, and she saves the boy.
And by the way, can I interrupt and say what reminded me of, it was very similar in the sense that this boy gets saved by his grandmother. Now, his grandmother is a fairly tough cookie, and not the best behaved person we ever played brilliantly by Glenn Close, by the way. But it really struck me as very similar in story kind of salvation story, to what happened to Justice Clarence Thomas, where he made this journey from his mother's home, which was a disaster, to his grandparents' home, and he talked about it being the most consequential journey of his life.
And when he got a
few streets away, when he got to his grandparents' home, who were very tough on him, and very, very tough on him, particularly his grandfather, who he adores and has a bust of his grandfather in his office at the Supreme Court. But it was a sort of similar thing like that, because basically when this young man who has been brought up in a very bad situation and has gone to the bad, and the grandmother takes him in, and the grandmother basically says, okay, the shit stops now, now I'm in charge, now, you're going to start working, or I'm going to just throw you on the street. Yeah. And I thought it was a similar thing where he needed that tough love.
Yeah. But the story, in the movie and in the book as well, as John Nolte says, she saves the boy, sees the potential in him, and although she's old and infirm and as poor as dirt, she kicks his ass till he gets it in gear.
Yeah.
He says that should have been the movie, and that should be. He said he wanted more of that, less of the thing.
Yes.
But
less of the misery.
As he points out, this is the reason why the bitter elites hate this movie. Is the fact is Grandma saves the boy, as opposed to big government or the community.
Oh yeah. Good point.
Community doesn't.
The village doesn't save him.
It doesn't take a. It didn't take a
village
to raise a child. In fact, the village was the problem.
Yeah.
The mama got him in behind the closed doors.
Mama.
Grandma got him in behind the closed doors and kicked his community out. Actually, stopped the community from coming in.
That's right.
Kicked his friends out, and as John Nolte says, young JD is not on the verge of repeating generational mistakes because capitalism is evil or America is bad or the government doesn't do enough. What's dragging him down are the bad choices. And what improves his, and this is why the elites hate it, what improves his life in this movie is good choices, are good choices. Leftists hate that message, as John says. One, because it's true. Two, it says anyone can succeed in America, which is also true. And number three, it also lays bare the lie of social engineering. And four, it creates a culture of rugged independence, which is an anathema of those who want to organise
society around big government.
And as John Nolte says, those elite critics, they can kiss my ass. So what do we say? We say it's no way the worst movie of the year. It is watchable. It's a little bit tough. I agree. Slow to start.
I do agree with John that that the hard stuff with his mother, with the boy's mother, is hard, and it's very hard. It's always hard to watch a young person, a child, in any kind of a difficult situation. And so he's in a very difficult situation with his mother, and I think they maybe overdo that. I could have done with. I'm with John on that. And when the salvation does come, like you are very relieved because it takes a while to get there. The performances, by the way, by Amy Adams, right, and by Glenn Close, off the charts, completely off the charts. I mean, you know, all kinds of Emmys and all kinds of whatevers, Oscars, I'm sure, are going to be coming their way. They're really, really great, actually.
Yes.
I liked, you know, I think there's some people who might look at it and say, "Oh God, nobody has it like that bad, life as bad as that." And the truth is, people do actually. Yes. Things happen to people, awful things happen to people, and they end up in dreadful situations. What this film proves, and his story proves, is that even in the worst situation, you can get out of the worst situation. He ends up in Yale, and he ends up married to a fabulous person.
And of course, when you think about it, who gives him the chance? Some white, middle-aged man, lawyer who hears him defend his mother and gives him a chance.
Well, we never talked about that, but I thought that scene where he's doing the interview, this kind of Yale obviously does this kind of a rush week where they have this kind of large dinner where the students get access to these guys who would give them, partners of firms who would give them an internship. And there's a kind of a moment where two of those partners from rival firms, you know, have a different reaction to this kid. Yeah. And I actually think that the guy brings the guy back for an interview also as a kind of a screw you to the other guy because he actually sees something in the guy. And luckily he did.
You know,
moving on.
I want to say John Nolte, if you go and read John Nolte's review actually in Breitbart, we'll put it up there on the screen. You know, I think another problem with John's review, not a problem, he's read the book. Apparently,
which we haven't.
We haven't, right? So I think the book is obviously more nuanced.
More political
probably as well. So John loved the book. John says, I'm not into memoirs, but I love this book. So he was all excited and it didn't live up to his expectations. It's a bit like Bonfire of the Vanities. I remember I watched the movie first, didn't read the book. I thought it was a great movie. Then I read the book and I said, I can see why people are so disappointed.
Interesting.
So, on to The Crown now.
On to The Crown. Well, actually, I'd like to go to Rebecca first. So the other movie we watched was Rebecca, which is based on the Daphne du Maurier novel. Kind of a Jane Eyre type story. I had never read Rebecca. I have never read Rebecca. I would recommend it. It's with Armie Hammer, who, you know, what people will remember from The Social Network, who's really great, actually.
The terrace is for guests only.
Monsieur, the young lady will be joining me. What did you do?
I'm a lady's companion.
Maxim de Winter. His wife died last year and is in dire need of company.
She was the love of his life. I wonder what she's thinking about you. Taking her husband, using her name.
I said I want the truth.
You didn't know her. Nobody did.
He can't go on living in that big old house with her ghost.
I don't believe in ghosts.
I suppose one slight thing on the back of my mind, and this will show you who I am, becoming my own mother here. Obviously we know now that
what was going on behind the camera.
What was going on? So that, I mean, he was apparently, we've met Armie Hammer, by the way, and back in the day he was happily married to a lovely lady out in Santa Barbara, and now he has abandoned the lovely lady in Santa Barbara to run off with the lady from the movie Rebecca.
Not exactly accurate. He hasn't run off with her, but there is massive speculation that there was...
Oh, I thought there was a running off thing. Okay, enough of that. Anyway, it's very well done.
Let's just say the chemistry on screen is there's lots of sparks on screen, and I think it's because there was also lots of sparks off screen.
That's what I said.
It's very well acted.
That's what I said. So basically, I would recommend it. It's really gorgeous to look at, and it's sort of a good mystery, by the way. It's a good mystery, good plot, nice plots and turns, and also lovely, lovely things to look at. Beautiful clothing, and kind of those mannerisms from from the 19th century. I thought it was delightful. No, 20th century actually. Sorry, it would have been the 20th, early 20th century.
Yeah, I thought the style of your woman. Sometimes I felt she was wearing clothes that were inappropriate, but maybe I'm wrong. And
Which one? Who?
The young lady. Remember?
Oh, you thought it was Phil. No. I don't think we'd be looking for style notes from you, Phil, in terms of what would be historically accurate and not in terms of clothing for women. Just throwing that out there.
I've been wearing the same T-shirt since 1920.
We all know that, Phil.
I had the same bathrobe
until somebody said it needed to be thrown out.
And you threw it out of a car in Australia.
Did I?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yes.
I threw it out of a car.
Are
you saying that I littered?
No, you went to a bin. I remember it well. We were in Australia. Remember that time?
See how that amnesia has come over me.
That was my bathrobe, and he
was very attached to the bathrobe.
As they say on the TV ad, sometimes a blankie isn't a blankie.
Oh God. Okay, all right, that's not good. We're now moving on to The Crown. Phelim, tell us about The Crown. We watched all of the 4th season of The Crown.
Let's move on from that sad moment there. The Crown, talking of sad moments. So, The Crown, of course, has been criticised for messing with timelines and actually making stuff up, such as the Charles and Diana relationship. That he was having an affair all through the marriage. He wasn't, apparently. He only started when the marriage had irretrievably broken down. The bigger lie... I
think this is a much better point.
Is the Michael Fagan when he got into the Queen's bedroom?
Oh yes, tell me now.
He delivered this. They made the whole episode out to be this
socialist thing,
anti-Thatcher. He was living this life of poverty, and he wanted again to tell the Queen to tell Thatcher to
be nice,
give him more money or
be
whatever.
Nicer.
This is all nonsense. This guy was had mental issues and. I mean, who wouldn't want to break into the Buckingham Palace? You know what I mean? Like, it's like you could see, oh my God, I could climb up that drain pipe and jump across there, and I can wander around Buckingham Palace. Like,
but in a typical Hollywood kind of move, actually, by the way, they took this as an opportunity. The story is true. I mean, the guy broke in not once but twice, which is extraordinary.
And spent 10 minutes with the Queen
and stole a bottle of wine, all of that kind of thing. But but they took that true story and then decided to pump a load of socialism into it, and have him make these, by the way, beautifully articulate speeches about the inequalities in the United Kingdom at the time
and the statistics.
But I actually think you have a better point here. I think this is a much better point.
The thing they didn't cover, and this is you're covering. I think it's only a decade, actually, less than a decade. Yeah, it's a decade of British politics, and they cover Lord Mountbatten's assassination.
Fair enough.
And by the way,
huge.
Can I just say something?
You can.
I remember Lord Mountbatten being assassinated. I remember it well, and I remember the Warren Point massacre of the same day. 18 soldiers dead. For me, the bigger bombing was the Warren Point bombing. Lord Mountbatten may have been important for the royal family, but he was not well known.
Can I give you a clue to why they might have included it, though, Phelim? The show is called The Crown. You see.
No. My point is then. Margaret Thatcher was very well known.
Correct.
Margaret Thatcher was almost assassinated in 1983
in the Brighton
bombing by the IRA.
And by the way, her dear friend died, right?
Well, her dear friend Gow was also blown up in a car bomb at the Houses of Commons.
But who was the guy who died in the Brighton bombing? I can see his face.
Norman Tebbit. He didn't. He was seriously injured.
Oh, seriously injured.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah, Norman Tebbit.
Was anyone killed in the Brighton bombing?
Yes, 5 people were killed.
There you go.
5 people were killed in the Brighton bombing. But Mrs. Thatcher's, right-hand man was killed in a car bombing in the House of Commons car park.
They didn't mention
before the election.
The Crown doesn't cover that.
But also she was in. They had it shows the Thatcher. She had a hotel room, and she was preparing the speech for the next day, and the hotel room was so small that she went into the bathroom to prepare the speech.
So she wouldn't disturb the husband.
So the husband could sleep. Then she wrapped it up and said, okay, and as she left, she got into bed, the bomb went off, and her bathroom was destroyed. She would have been killed if she had been in there preparing. Now, that's a massive thing. The Prime Minister, imagine the weekly meeting with the Prime Minister after her surviving that bombing.
It's interesting that they chose to leave that out.
They did not put this dramatic scene in The Crown.
And the reason was, we think...
You can't do it and be unsympathetic to Thatcher. Thatcher would come out of that well. Thatcher the next day gave a speech. She survived that bombing. She gave a speech at her party conference the next day.
You know, exactly.
Yes, they distorted lots of things. I think the Fagin thing is a disgrace. Charles and Diana, you know, that's a personal thing for a lot of people. But not to cover the Brighton bombing and the assassination of her right-hand man, Gow.
I think the other...
Ari Neves, sorry, his name was Ari Neves.
Ari Neves.
Yeah, he, you know, I mean, those are massive parts of British history that would have been, the Queen would have very interesting things to say. That Prince Philip would have very interesting things to say. Prince Charles would too, but they decided not to cover it because they wanted Thatcher to look bad.
And I think they were slightly soft on the IRA in their treatment of the IRA as well, the way they did it. But the other thing I was going to say that I think I object to, which is kind of a different, completely different point, apropos of nothing, of The Crown. The other thing I didn't like was the number of warnings we got. I think 3 times we got warnings that we would have scenes of an eating disorder. Yeah. You know, blowing people up, blowing a child up, by the way, at Mullaghmore, no problem. But you know what? Scenes of an eating disorder. Right. Somebody puking into a toilet, really we need to worry about. Yes. But they're blowing the child up, poor Paul Maxwell, in Mullaghmore, and the other boy whose name, of course, Natchbull.
Yeah, 2 children.
2 children
were
blown
up
in Mullaghmore, no problem.
With Lord Mountbatten.
No problem. We're watching that, no warning about that, no telling you. Does it? Because you know what? That might upset a few people, the idea of children being blown up in Mullaghmore, God help us. But anyway, I want to mention...
But we needed lots of warning that Diana might be...
might throw up in the toilet. And it was like, you know what? I don't want to watch this anymore. Yeah. We have come to the end of this rather long scoop. We would like to say a couple of things. Please watch Obamagate movie at obamagatemovie.com and share with your friends. Oh, and I realised something else we should be doing, and Magda now is going to have to go and get it. We have some shout-outs to do, which we need to remember to do, and we will do some more of them today. But also, can you please rate our podcast? It would be really, really helpful for us, and leave a comment on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you get podcasts. And we love you. And we're going to do some shout-outs now. And we're starting where, Film, today?
Yeah, these are the people who funded the Obamagate movie. We couldn't have done it without you. So let's start with Carol from Arcadia, California, Darlene from Edmonton, Alberta, Judith from Shoreview, Minnesota, Glenna from Saginaw, Texas, John from Goodyear, Arizona, Anne from Grafton, Vermont, Siobhan from Alexandria, Virginia, Susan from Port Washington, New York,
Douglas from Eagle, Idaho. Oh, hello, Douglas. B from Blowveld.
We have friends moving to Eagle.
Yeah, we need to be in touch with you, by the way, Douglas.
And then
David and Sally.
Actually, B. Blowveld, Dr. Blowveld from New York.
Oh, okay, very good. David and Sally from Lincoln, California. Douglas from Everett, Pennsylvania. Clifford from Peoria, Illinois. Tim from New Hamburg, Ontario. Helen from Pauquag, New York. Kathleen from Santa Monica, California. Kathleen, thank you. Hello. Gregory from Overland Park, Kansas. Oh, hello. I have a very good friend in Overland Park. Nancy in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Edward in Norfolk, Connecticut. Michael in Anacortes, Washington. Therese in Wisteria Drive, Chagrin Falls. Ralph from Bellevue, Nebraska. Kathleen from New York. Chris from Milan, Michigan.
Brandon from Factoryville, Pennsylvania. Kent from Waterloo, Ontario. Carol and Andreas from Chemnitz, Sachsen. Now that I think is somewhere in like Europe, right?
Sachsen.
We don't know where that is. Tina, we're going to look it up though. Tina from Woodbridge. Alex from Chesterfield, Missouri. Laurie from Elgin, Illinois. William from Broomfield, Colorado. Bradley from Centralia, Illinois.
David from Tucson,
Arizona.
Yes. Conal from Topanga Canyon.
No, just Topanga, California.
Topanga, California. Susan from Port Washington, New York. James from Wildwood, Georgia. Noel from Plymouth, Minnesota. Nancy from Austin, Texas. Anne from Houston, Texas. Richard from Stowe, Massachusetts. Gary from Orland Park, Illinois.
Orland Park, yeah.
Russ from Coconut Creek, Florida.
Jennifer from Austin, Texas. Karen from Sugarland, Texas. Sally from Newport Beach, California. We know you, Sally. Yes.
Stephen from West Hollywood, California. We know Stephen as well. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
We couldn't have done without you. Robert from Austin, Texas. Thank you, Robert. It's big thanks to Stephen. Robert and Sally for their very generous donations.
Very generous donations. Melissa from Decatur, Alabama. Friend of mine, hello there, Melissa. Linda in San Diego, California. Charles in Lake Wales, Florida. William in Beaverton, Oregon. Jennifer in Jackson, Wyoming. Brian in Columbia, Maryland. Alchul family in Salem, Oregon. The Carrie Carrig in San Bernardino, California. Erin in Rochester, New York. Norman in Lakeville, Minnesota. Robert in Louisville, Kentucky.
Melissa in Decatur, Alabama.
Again, that's our friend Melissa.
Larry in Topeka, Kansas. Christina in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Gary in the Woodlands, Texas. Coralie. In San Antonio, Texas. And David in Studio City, California.
And Gail in Corona del Mar, California. And another friend of ours. Alan in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Jennifer in Washington, D.C. Anne in Monrovia, California. Esther in Oshawa, Ontario.
And Daniel in Epsom, New Hampshire. Jeffrey in Houston, Texas. Donald C. in Beaconsfield, Quebec. Graham in North Sandwich, British Columbia. And finally, for this week,
Sandy in the Villages in Florida. Well, a big shout out to you, Sally, in the Villages in Florida. Sandy. Did I say Sally?
Yes.
Sandy in the Villages, Florida. Love you. And love all of you. And by the way, can I just say, just the experience of reading out these names means so much to us, to know that we have friends all over the country, all over the world, who believe in what we do and are willing to support us by sending in money on their Visa card, and we really do appreciate it.
You can see the
results. We are a 501c3, so you do get a tax write-off, and please remember to do that. And you can do that right now at unreportedstorysociety.com. Love you, and see you next week.
Thanks, bye.